All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's August 17th, 2022. My name's Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, which means we help companies own their infrastructure by building it together with your teams and showing them ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered, so feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by heading over to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. I'll automatically post a recording of the session today to our YouTube channel. So if you want to support what we're doing over here and give your vote of confidence, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It helps us out a great deal. So with that said, let's jump into some announcements here. Oh, this is not the Stockholm. I forgot to delete that. I am back in the US here. So ignore that. All right, so we have released a ton of new Terraform modules over the past couple of weeks that I've forgotten to announce. So I thought I'd do that today. One of those is ECR-public. Matt Calhoun on the team whipped this one up. The use case for this is if you want to migrate away from like Docker Hub and publish or distribute Docker images that are available anonymously, then this is the way to go about doing that. We built another module for it because it's significantly different enough from how ECR private registries work. So that's why there's this separate option. The configurations options are also quite different. Matt, anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, I think that pretty much covers it. They specifically things like lifecycle and a bunch of other things are missing from ECR public. So that's why we decided to fork and move over to a new module. But hopefully they'll get some parity over time and we can reconverge.
Yep, that's a good way of putting it. All right. The next module is related to some work we're doing for one of our larger clients. We're building out a analytics data science practice for them, leveraging the entire suite of AWS products for that, including Glue, Lakeformation, Athena, S3, of course, Kinesis-streams, and so forth. So you'll see some new modules for that. Looks like we haven't enabled the bridge crew scanning yet, so some of these badges are broken. I got to go look into that. Yeah, they're the first pass at implementing support for the various features there. So Lakeformation is Amazon's way of managing large pools of data. Glue is a workflow management tool, kind of like Amazon's proprietary alternative to Airflow. This one, the vast majority of the implementation is based on submodules of the module, so make sure you check those out. Let's see here if we got to, yeah, so we have the READMEs updated with usage examples for those. And then Athena, which is a way to run MapReduce style queries, SQL queries, isn't against S3 buckets. And Kinesis-streams. So Kinesis has, multiple offerings these days. There's Kinesis Firehose, Kinesis-streams, Kinesis Analytics, and Kinesis Video. We haven't had any interest yet in doing analytics or video, but Firehose is so unique, it's hard to generalize it. So we haven't built anything, any module yet for Firehose, but Kinesis-stream was pretty straightforward. All right. Any questions on the new Terraform modules? All right. Next thing that was shared with me was a very minor announcement, but GitHub Pages, they've been around forever. It's how a lot of people host their private sites. It's only fitting that now those are built with GitHub Actions by default, as opposed to some, opaque process that was used in the past. And for those of you who were using Atlassian products on-prem, namely like Jira, and they've now sunset self-hosting Jira. So companies who are accustomed to having their own private domain associated with their Jira instances were left high and dry, which is odd because there's this ticket that's been around for literally 11 years and has I'm following because I really do want to know when it's released, but it's really annoying because literally once or twice a day somebody lands on this page and comments, "Oh, I'm surprised this doesn't exist yet." And it's been around for this, but now they finally come out and given a date and promising it by next year. So, gosh, could you imagine how something seemingly so simple must be so incredibly difficult for them to rally behind? Then a couple things. It looks like Anton Bobenko is back from summer break and updating weekly.tf. So if you haven't yet subscribed to his newsletter, check that out, weekly.tf. A couple interesting projects there. One is this Terradozer. Apparently, it's not working at the very moment with this version of Terraform, but in principle, it sounds pretty cool. If you have some orphan state files and you're just curious, or if those all resources associated with those were deleted, this Terradozer can look at a state file without any Terraform files and just go nuke those resources. So I think that's kind of cool as a way to clean up accounts. It's a little Python utility. And then the other tool was this CF to TF, also via weekly.tf. A lot of TFs there. So the idea here is to translate, optimistically, I say, it's not going to work out of the box, but take a large subset of CloudFormation code and turn it into functioning Terraform code. It's probably going to require your massaging of it to get it over the line, but maybe it reduces some of that effort. Now, that, of course, is probably mostly attractive to somebody who's tasked with converting a huge set of CloudFormation to Terraform code, and you're not concerned yet about modularizing it and drying up that code, because anything that a tool like this is going to generate is something that most self-respecting Terraform developers probably aren't going to want to manage for a long run. All right. Any other announcements, things that caught your eyes this week? I didn't get a chance to check out any AWS announcements.
There weren't really anything that I would say is all that exciting to this community.
Yeah, it was so slow.
The only thing that I saw that was quasi relatable is that CloudFront now supports HTTP 3 on all their edge locations.
Okay. All right. And the exciting thing with HTTP 3 is that it's a binary implementation, right, of HTTP, so it's a little bit more light on the wire.
And UDP based.
Oh, right, and UDP based.
Below, yeah. So it's pretty. I think what's the thing called, the Quick protocol? I think, right, QUIC.
How is it that browsers negotiate which protocol to use? Does the server announce that it supports HTTP 3 and then subsequent requests would be over that?
It basically reads the request coming in, the request headers actually say the protocol that's being used, and then it will try to negotiate up if it can. And if the client doesn't support it, it just can, most HTTP 3 implementations will fall back to HTTP 2 if the browser doesn't support HTTP 3. But I think what the big thing is like speed, because it does something with TLS handshakes and it speeds it all up. So I think it's like 15% quicker or something to first byte, and like something larger than that in total page load times, just by changing the protocol.
It's significantly faster for bulk data transfer.
Oh, you're very faint. Was that Robert? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, it sounds like you're at the other end of the room.
How about now? Is that better?
A little bit better. Definitely
I'm not sure what
speakerphony.
mic I'm on. I was just saying it's much faster for bulk data transfers.
Nice. I'm also wondering if it's then also a lot better for image heavy pages. Loading lots of the assets there, because that was always the problem with regular HTTP. Multiple streams and hosts were used. All right, let's see here. Well, let's go into talking points. This was an old one actually from last week. Isaac, if you're on the line, hopefully you saw our conversation on that. Let's go into any other questions. Let's see. Any questions in the Zoom chat here? As I always have to chase the windows around. Nope. All right. Office hours channel here. Looks like Terraform 1.3 alpha was just released, another alpha release, so not yet the real deal. And Venkata, I recently heard that there are cheaper alternatives to AWS support provided by their third-party partners. I'm unclear on which partners offer this, but does anyone use any alternative to AWS support? If so, who do you pay, and is it just as good? Venkata, what I'd be really interested about that would be is, to me, the biggest value of real AWS support is that they have unfettered access to so many other things behind the scenes at AWS and can see things that even if you're a exceptionally experienced engineer at AWS, you wouldn't have visibility into that. So my concern using any other support plan would be, well, I guess it could be layered. So long as that support plan has the ability somehow via their relationship to escalate to AWS, then that's cool.
What you just said is exactly what I'm unclear about, is do they have backdoor access with their own support plan into AWS? And I haven't reached out to them about this, but wasn't sure if anyone here is trying to reduce costs by using a third-party support plan and then escalating through that provider for that behind the scenes access, like when your EC2 really does not want to stop and you need that backdoor access to actually do it, or the other usual issues that pop up in the cloud.
Yeah, Elasticsearch.
Unfortunately, the answer from AWS on that is they're going to go look at that and they're going to say that support is not enabled on the account that you're opening a ticket for. So please enable support on that account, and then we'll work with you on fixing that issue. Like I've run into that before.
Got it. Yeah,
I'm just wondering if it's set up as a reseller, maybe under the reseller arrangement.
Maybe.
Yeah, I have worked with something similar, and it was just always having a middleman in there that was just kind of irritating to us. It did always cause some delays because they were contractually obligated to look at it first before they would even open a ticket. And even when it was just obviously an AWS issue, it would just cause delay and frustration. It did save a fair amount of money though.
My understanding is the latter point, that it saves a lot, but obviously any middleman is going to slow you down. But yeah, it sounds like there is a path where you just have to use them as escalation. That's what I was a little unclear about. I haven't reached out to any providers, but a customer we're working with is not willing to throw down the cash for the support plan. So we're looking at other options.
Robert, do you know how it's implemented? Technically speaking, is it that they are a reseller for your account and then they also provide support?
Yeah, they exactly follow the VAR model. Yeah, so
okay.
just a service reseller, and consultants. They have a bunch of services.
Oh, does that mean you actually pay them your AWS bill every month, or do you still pay AWS?
No, you pay through them, and then they,
Oh.
they try and leverage their, buying power with AWS and all that stuff. So.
Oh, it's very similar to, I guess, how GCP has billing partners.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
The one caveat there, I've been involved with that with another customer one time, and a couple of them require that you use their like root organization account, and then they create an OU for you, and all your accounts go underneath the OU that they have, which gets a little tricky. Like if you don't end up owning your own root account.
I would hate
and
that.
it came up, and it came up when someone wanted to use AWS SSO, and then you had to install it in the root account, and they were like, no, you can't do that because we don't own the root account. And then there was this whole like argument about it. So, so hopefully they like, maybe they've gotten away from that practice now, but that goes back a couple of years. But I did hit that snag once.
It sounds a little scary that they've got that much access into it. I know with GCP billing partners, they can't see into your account. They can only handle your billing, is my understanding. So they have no chance of accessing your resources. It sounds like it's a little different in AWS, where they could.
I'm not suggesting every reseller is that way. I'm just saying I have seen an arrangement like that. So make sure you ask all your questions before you enter into one of those arrangements. That was kind of one of my thoughts.
That was uncomfortable for us too. We had to, the email for the root account had to be their email. It wasn't somebody in our organization anymore. So I didn't love it personally, but
yeah, cool. That's a pretty big caveat. That's good to know. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? I had a couple ideas we could try out if there were no other questions. What we do is, we have this design decision process at Cloud Posse. And I'm just totally winging this here, but let's take an example like KMS, for example. Decide on KMS requirements. So what we try and do as part of these design decisions is capture as much of our working knowledge working with that technology, so that when the customer has a requirement, hey, implement KMS keys, and we want to go gather those requirements, then we first share a link to the design decision and then review that on our call with the customer. So what I thought I could try and do, because what makes these design decisions so valuable is basically capturing all the gotchas, all the things that you only learn from experience. So like KMS sounds harmless, use as many keys as possible, but there's a gotcha there. For example, if you're using S3 buckets with enormous number of objects that would then need to be decrypted and served, well, your cost for using a customer managed key, I believe, would be a lot higher then. And there's this concept of then the bucket keys, which were introduced later on, which can reduce some of those costs. So I don't know, just if there's nothing, we can move on to another one. Anybody have some other thoughts on KMS gotchas that they've had to deal with?
I don't know if it's captured in here, but if you want to enable server access logging on a bucket, you can't use a customer managed key. You got to use their managed keys. Which
say that one again, is server log access?
Server access logging. You want to turn that on an S3 bucket. And it's actually, if you search for server access logging, like the main page that it brings you to, like there's a little info note in there that specifically has a call out that says like, hey, we just went through this. We were doing multi-region KMS keys. We wanted to like swap out all the disparate KMS keys everywhere for like a multi-region key. And then we figured out that like server access logging can't use the customer managed keys, that is AWS managed keys.
Okay. That's that's good feedback. We'll try and find a source for that.
Yeah, I actually found it the other day. I can link it real quick. You can carry on then.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
I'll offer
Mark,
one.
yeah, Mark, I see your hands up.
Yeah, sure. I have come across this when trying to do AMI sharing across accounts, where if you use the region default KMS key for encryption of the snapshot, you can't share it across accounts. So it requires a customer managed key.
Can
So
you
like the region default AWS managed key.
Correct.
Yeah.
Question around that. Could you convert it to use a customer managed key from like, is there an easy conversion process, or do you have to recreate that AMI from scratch?
You have to decrypt it and re-encrypt it, basically.
Yeah. They don't make that part easy.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops. I didn't mean to do that. There we go.
And I've also found that the workflow and the state management of KMS grants is totally outside the AWS web console. So discovering the state of your KMS grants for customer managed keys is very opaque. You have to use the CLI.
Okay.
Like you can't go look at these keys and their grants in the web console. And those are the fundamental enablers of cross-account use.
All right, that's interesting. Any other KMS gotchas? I see Ronnie, or no, I can't say. Here's the link there. Okay, so let me add that to the context here. There, and the call out is here. Oops. All right.
So Eric, I think the what you wrote there is actually backwards.
Okay.
Is that if you want to use server logging, and you have to use CMK.
Okay.
Right. So read that again. You can.
Yeah,
so what it says
you
can use default bucket encryption only if you use AES 256. Default encryption with KMS keys is not supported. You know, there. So I think you have to use a KMS key.
Default encryption with KMS keys is, oh, okay, gotcha. Okay. You must.
You can't use the KMS key, right? You got to use the SSE S3 AWS managed key. Because when the server access logging tries to write the data into the S3 bucket, you can't grant it access to the KMS. Like it just, so if you try to say, hey, this bucket's default encryption is like using this KMS key, it just will never be able to write to it until you switch off the KMS encryption and onto the SSE encryption. At least that was my experience, because it wouldn't work, and then I seeked out why it's not working. Maybe I just did something wrong, and then that's also how I read that.
Maybe I'm reading it backwards again. Wait.
You can use default bucket encryption on the target bucket only if you use AES 256.
Right.
So if you're using the default bucket with this, then it works.
Correct.
But if you were using an AWS KMS key then it's not SSE-KMS, then it's not supported.
Right, and it won't. It'll never write your server access logs over to the bucket, because can't grant it access to the KMS key. Or I guess you can write a policy for it, but it just never takes. What I experienced. Trying to grant it to like logs.delivery, like the service.
Okay.
And really, honestly, like, would you really want to use KMS on server access logging anyways? Because that's just going to like jack up your costs real high. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I read you can hit, if you're using KMS, you can hit a quota on the encryption, right? If you're using the SSE or SSE S3, you'll never hit a quota.
Oh, well, that's an interesting note you bring up there. There's a quota related to KMS.
Yeah, every time you try to decrypt something, right, there's like a quota per second or something like that. Request quotas.
Yeah, they're increasable though.
Ask for more.
Yeah, it's like it's a soft quota, like most things in. Excuse me.
But somewhere, I think on that same page that I linked, I think it's also in there. But yeah, you won't hit a quota with encryption if you're using like the SSE S3s. You just use their managed ones. That I don't have a readily link. I might be able to find it real quick. But I know for sure there is quotas on KMS. Like you can hit that, because we were recently switching everything to multi-region keys, and we're like, well, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't like use the same one for everything. We might run into an issue.
That's brilliant. Thanks for sharing all these other examples. So another design decision that we recently worked through, actually Matt Calhoun was helping us write up this design decision, was when approaching Cognito. So Cognito is Amazon's managed user pool / single sign-on service that you use for your applications, and it integrates with either your apps or API gateway, and it can give services AWS short-lived STS AWS credentials to access things. So one of the biggest gotchas, of course, with Cognito is that there's no easy migration path. So a lot of our customers, they have Cognito deployed with ClickOps or CloudFormation in some legacy account. Now they want to terraform it out in this new organization. And to the best of our knowledge, there is no better way right now other than doing one of two things, requiring every user do a password reset and log in with the new pool, or application changes. So you have to authenticate with so the application would have to test the authentication with both the new pool and the legacy pool if it fails. Any better migration paths that you're aware of for Cognito?
Yeah, so that, just to be clear, that's only if you're using Cognito username and password on your pool. If you're using like a social provider for auth or SAML or OIDC or any of those things, then this isn't really an issue. You can, because you're not storing the password anywhere in Cognito. It's only if you store the password in Cognito itself.
Oh, that's a really good point. Cognito migration. Oops, it
actually says that in the doc here too. So it's just not clear. So
yes, it only emphasizes this, but not the opposite. That if you're using SSO with some other identity provider, then this is a non-issue. Yeah. So we'll make a sense. provider. This is like an Auth0 or something? Or
it could be anything. It could be Google, Auth0, Facebook, Twitter, Apple ID, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Any other Cognito gotchas for Terraform users, especially? Any issues you've had using? Here I see Isaac posting something in the chat here. I'm having a really tough time coming up with a decent questions that will help me filter out people that can do high-level architecture. Okay, so a hiring question. Yeah, let's get to that right after this, Isaac. All right, we'll make that clarification here. Well, since we got a question, let's jump into that question then. So we've brought this up a couple times on office hours, but it's been a while now, at least a couple months since we talked about hiring questions. So Isaac is having some tough time coming up with decent questions that will help filter out people who can do high-level architecture, but can also get their hands dirty writing code, be it infrastructure code like Terraform or anything else that's needed to get the job done. And it's true. One thing you got to watch out for is that there's a lot of people who can talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. I know I can read what's going through Matt Calhoun's mind right now, which is you have to do coding exercises, but we haven't done as many of those. So I'm going to turn that over to Matt. Matt, you have opinions on this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've been pretty strong in opinion about this, that unless you work together with the person, like in, whether it be for an hour or a half a day or a whole day or whatever it is, it's really hard to actually determine if you're going to be able to work together in the long term. And it has to do with style, how they ask questions, how they react to feedback, when do they ask questions, do they understand the assignment given to them, do they ask for help at all the right times, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a strong advocate of, if you get someone who you think you want to hire, it's worthwhile to say, like, let's spend 4 hours together, like actually working together, and just make your determination based on that, or 8 hours or whatever it is, and try to give them something that's as close to or is actually real work that you can get without having to have them ramp up on a bunch of stuff. But I find the more highly contrived examples are much harder to get a real view on people. So if you can actually pull something off the backlog that doesn't require a lot of ramp up time or anything like that, and say, let's work on this problem together, I think you'll find a lot out with that person. Be like, here, how would you approach doing this, and see what questions they ask, give them answers, tell them to go off on their own and work for a couple hours and ping you on Slack if they need help, that kind of thing, and make sure that they check in with you, and then get back and review with them at the end of that process. And I think you'll be much happier with how it works out, even though it's it is a dedicating a large chunk of time, but it's worth it before you hire the wrong person, in my opinion.
I've been surprised sometimes. There's so many things as developers or people that we do this stuff day in, day out, that I assume pretty much everyone on this call today, would pass with flying colors the request, just open a pull request for that change. And you wouldn't even think that that's something you have to ask or test or validate. And I've seen people that have come through our door at some point that they couldn't do that. Something just so.
So Matt, I have some comments on that. So firstly, I think you guys operate out of open source repos primarily. And so doing, exposing that code and doing pull requests, totally you can do that. I think most of us are not in that situation. So we can't really give access to actual code that may have bugs and that sort of thing. And then the other one is, In my experience, giving like a 4 to 8 hour coding test is like a 100% loss rate on candidates returning my calls.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll say I've used this method at multiple places, before Cloud Posse, and didn't have that same experience. So on both of your points, so both having worked in a closed source, environment, either I'll grant them access to something temporarily, or find something that's easy to collaborate on, from a code perspective. But honestly, I don't know. It seems to me that if you've narrowed down a candidate and you say like, hey, the only way to know that we can work together, successfully, in the going forward, is for us to spend 4 to 8 hours together, actually working together. And if candidates aren't willing to invest 4 to 8 hours in something that's going to be the next 3, 5, 7 years of their life, or whatever it is, it seems like a red flag to me. Like, it seems like the wrong person. Like, what if you said to them, come into the office and do in-person interviews and do coding exercises on the whiteboard? Like, almost everyone is saying yes to those kinds of things. I know it's a little different, since COVID, but my whole point is that people are used to investing some time in the interviewing process. So at the end of the interviewing process, or to get to the final stage of the interviewing process, that seems like a pretty reasonable ask to me. And if maybe you're actually deselecting the people that you want to deselect if they're not willing to spend a few hours on what will be their future career.
Can or should that be paid for their time?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to ask, that question, and I've done it both ways before. The getting it paid thing, it's easier in a small, like, nimble organization. That's where I did that. I told people, like, I would do this, but in larger organizations, it's harder to just like get all the logistics set up to actually be able to pay a person. So like that turns out, but again, like, a half day, setting aside a half day to finalize your interviewing process, or or a day, or whatever it is, seems like a reasonable ask if you both to that point are feeling it and want to move forward. Like, it doesn't seem crazy to me. But your experience obviously is valid too. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, in my personal experience, I've had pretty good success with that.
Yeah, so I feel a couple of interviews now are actually, like, there's an interview I went in for, and they actually add the fact that at the last stage, they're going to add you to their Slack channel, and you might collaborate and do a couple of stuff with them. And they will say they want you to be sure if it's an environment you want to work with. But I think at the end of the day, the idea was to see if you could actually work, like, at least get to do the very bare minimum stuffs in their company. So I think it's like an approach that every company is trying to put in now in their interview process. So at the final stage, you will just like be introduced to your Slack, and then maybe do 1 or 2 stuff with them for like a week or 3 days.
So it's definitely like something that would happen. Therefore, like, it's the last thing to check off, more or less. You've already decided everything else looks good. Now this is just like a sanity check that everything is going to work. So the candidate at this point will already have invested so much of their time and excitement getting this opportunity that this is just one final thing to cross it off. So it's not used early on in the screening process, because then it's going to be like, there's too much uncertainty from the candidate's perspective.
Well, I think, and also from the company's perspective, you don't want to invest that amount of time with every person that you interview. You want to go through. So just to rewind that, just to make sure that we're on the same page, is what I would do typically is I would have a conversation with the candidate, talk through their background, ask them to explain to me kind of some projects they've done, explain their roles, how they made choices, that kind of thing. But I don't generally get too deep into like technical questions at that point. What I would then do is have someone else on the team do specifically like a technical interview as much as you can by asking questions and doing that. And then presumably, if you through both of those stages you want to go through and move forward, you would then tell them that you want to move to like a practical exercise. And that exercise should also be like as close to what it would really be like to work with you as possible, so that the candidate can also feel comfortable that the way that the company works and the way that you would interact with them over Slack and jump on Zoom and do all of those kinds of things would be the way that they want to work, and they can work with you, etc. So I think it's a two-way street there.
This is all very helpful. I mean, that's something I really struggled with, and a 1 hour interview where I give them a lead code question it's not helpful for me. It doesn't give me any good signal. And other things I've tried, like I tried once, I just gave people a very simple Python app that has a hello world endpoint, and I asked them to like Dockerize it and then tell me how they would get it from their computer to a cloud service, like how would they host it. And you'd be surprised at lots of people who say they have lots of experience with DevOps couldn't even tell me what options they have for hosting an app on AWS. And so it's just really hard.
So, Isaac, I think you've identified it. Hiring people is very, very hard. It's by far the hardest part of this job.
Yeah. And I think you also need to understand when you're interviewing people that everyone has different styles like out there of how they work and how they do everything. Like if you sit me in a room and ask me like, what are the Docker, command line switches to do X, Y, or Z? Like I'm going to be, I'll know some of them and I'll be able to tell you it, but I'm not the guy that memorizes like every little thing, but I can tell you, I can Google something in 2 seconds and have it working for you.
Neither am I.
Right.
And I felt bad about that because I told them you can Google whatever you want, but they felt as if that was a trap or something. So
but my point is that a practical exercise of like, go do this and get this, get this into this state is not a testing of how someone works necessarily. It's a testing of their work product. So if they need to draw it out on paper first, like really quickly, and then they start to work, or they have to Google 2 things to refresh themselves before they go and do it, like that's all valid because we're not necessarily all working on the same exact things, like, and have the same level of like, cache warming in our brains as everyone else does right now. And I think that's part of the process, is understanding that. So, and then there are just people that do really well at algorithms and whiteboard coding and that kind of thing. And there are other people that are just terrible at it, and they both can be like really good engineers. Like, but at the bottom, one isn't necessarily indicative of the other. It's crazy. So that's why like I personally find like giving a real world like work example to be the best way to do it, because it's not some hypothetical thing that someone just doesn't test well or doesn't do well on on a whiteboard or any of that kind of thing. They actually get to do work, and you can see their work product and see when they ask for help and see the things that they considered and the trade-offs they made, and where they didn't ask for help and spent way too much time, or where they asked for help way too early in the process. And those are much better indicators of how they'll be as an employee than, if they can answer something on the whiteboard and, in 2 seconds after you ask it, that kind of thing. So, give me a bubble sort algorithm, yay, everyone can memorize that, who cares?
So in the chat, Matthew Pickens is posting, it's the difference between an organization that has a large pool of candidates to choose from and candidates that have a lot of opportunities. It's a red flag for me when a company asks you to do work for free, especially after they have been milking your knowledge for 4 interviews. So I think there's a few different things to see there. I think most of the time, if the company is asking you these questions, they're not I mean, they're probably asking questions that they already know the answers to or think they know the answers to. They're just validating that you see eye to eye on those outcomes. I do agree that companies that have a lot of brand recognition or attention will be able to do this a lot better than others. Companies like a Facebook or Google or something like that. Also some smaller startups, if they have high visibility and there's street cred for being part of it, I think you can still ask for it. But I wouldn't look at, you know, in terms of doing work for free, that's where, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair for the company. If you are sacrificing 3 hours of your day or 4 hours of your day to do one of these exercises, I think it's totally fair for the company to compensate you on that. But be advised that any work you're doing for that, the company's not going to use it for anything. So it's not like value add in that sense, but it is fair to compensate you for your time.
Yeah, so back to the earlier point, I mean, it does definitely make it easier if you have an open source, you know, product or pieces of things that are open source. So in the past, when I've worked at another organization that has a lot of open source stuff, that's been one of the things we've done is like pick one of the open issues on an open source project and then let's work on that together to see how you would bring that, you know, wrestle that to the ground and see how far you can get within, you know, the 4 to 8 hours or whatever. Like that's another way to handle it. But yeah, I mean, I think the compensation thing is like hard. I mean, I turn this around and say, if they sat you in a conference room for 4 hours and they had you talk to people and they had you draw answers on whiteboards, do you expect compensation for that? And isn't that taking just as much of your time and brain share and everything else as actually like putting finger to keyboard to solve a problem? And like, I just chalk it up to that's part of the interview process. And you know, if they said something like, I want you to work for a week on this, that's a different story. But if it roughly translates to about the time of a normal interview cycle, but it's finger to keyboard rather than marker to whiteboard or, you know, voice to ear or whatever, like I would pretty much, I would pretty much just chalk it up as this is part of my getting, you know, my next gig. And that's the time I need to invest if this is truly an organization I want to work at, you know, for the next several years of my career.
Yeah, it's an investment both ways.
Yeah.
Well, that's I think yeah, that was a lot of interesting. Well, one last thing.
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say I think it's a two-way investment on that one, right? So you're investing your time, obviously, but the organization is also spending a significant amount of time with you. And if my guess is that they're not doing that just so they can get like, you know, 4 hours of free work from someone who they don't even know might be the right quality person for it. You know, they would
tens of thousands of dollars they're spending, tens of thousands of dollars to try and get this person on board. Plus, that person's probably not going to be efficient for another 2 months, maybe. You know, so that's another, you know, 30,000 to 45,000 maybe on top of that. So this is a big investment the company's already making. So be advised on the other side. All right, I think that was a lot of great topics there. Let's see if there's any other questions that people have. Across the board.
I have a question about Terraform Destroy. Have you guys had this experience where you make changes to your code, then you destroy and things get out of sync?
Can happen. Yeah, I mean, the long story short there is that you just, you know, don't go too far off the beaten path if you're going to destroy something before you apply and destroy. Like you have to be, you know, you have to be semi-careful there.
I wonder if this Terradozer that we looked at a little bit earlier is a solution to that.
It could be, maybe, because like let me take a step back for everyone else. I'm not sure exactly this is what you're talking about, but it's a problem I've had in the past working with Terraform in this, is that, you know, you're building out like a Terraform module, root module. You've applied it multiple times, it's been fine. Then you make some significant changes to that module, maybe point it to a different child module somewhere, but you never maybe applied it.
Yep.
So that code was committed.
Exactly.
And now you're doing a Terraform destroy. And it's like, I don't know what to do. So
yeah, and the environment that you're trying to destroy is not the one that your code is describing, right? It's the one that your code used to describe before you made the change.
Yeah, or exactly, or in that situation, yeah. So that Terradozer sounds like maybe that's why it exists, in part. It is kind of odd though to me that if you're doing a destroy, can't that be entirely based on the plan? And why doesn't Terraform do it that way?
Well, that's an interesting point, but I don't believe it would do it that way because you have to have code to describe the thing that you're going to destroy, even if it's in the state, I think. Right? Otherwise, and this is a question that I'm not sure about, right?
Yeah.
In order to destroy something, does it have to be described in the code and in the state? If it's not in the state, it won't touch it. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's in the state, but not in the code, is it now exempt from destruction?
Yeah, you could get like what's the word? Can't think of it. Orphaned. Yeah, you could have an orphaned state. Like object doesn't state's there, but no code.
But Terraform won't touch it now because the code doesn't refer to it.
Yeah, you got to go clear it out of like the DynamoDB table yourself and the state folder or wherever your state's stored. Excuse me. But yeah, maybe Terradozer can go do that for you, right?
Yeah.
I used to see a lot of this when back in the day when you would do like security groups, and security groups would call to other security groups and one would get destroyed or something and it would all get out of whack and then you would have it. But they've done a lot of work I think to fix a lot of that stuff.
Anyway, these are just some things, some pain points that I remember from some time back.
I think it also has to do with what things can be tracked, right? Because some things like can't be tracked, right? Like when you go look at S3 bucket nowadays, like 1,000 deprecated things on it that are like, hey, use this new thing because like we can't track the old thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think we are at the end of the hour here pretty much. So let's wrap things up. If you haven't yet already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. Today's episode will be posted there. So if there are some segments that were really interesting that you want to share with your team, that's a great way to spread the wealth, spread the knowledge. So if you haven't added me on LinkedIn, please do. LinkedIn.com/in/Osterman. I'd love to stay in touch with everyone here and what they're doing. Also, if you want to register for office hours, we do send out a weekly invite via Google Calendar. So go to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, cloudposse.com/office hours to get that. And lastly, if you are interested in working with Cloud Posse and seeing what we're all about, or just curious, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz. Just a few quick scoping questions, and then you'll be prompted to book a time. You'll talk with me directly, and we'll understand your situation, see if we can help you out. So look forward to meeting you sometime soon. Thanks, everyone. See you all next week, same time, same place.